HDR, it's over. We were misled. We were all teased about the magic of 10,000 nit HDR. So TVs kept on getting brighter and brighter and brighter. First 1,000 nits, then 2,000. Then this year, OLED TV hit 4,000 nits, claimed LG Display. Not enough. Hisense's UX 116-inch RGB mini LED, 8,000 nits. The brightness war is done. But here's the punchline. Now that everyone's got super bright TV, with the lucky few getting close to that 10,000 nit HDR impact, Hollywood has started releasing dimmer and dimmer movies, with this year's blockbuster being dimmer than ever. Today, let's talk about how we got here and the TV winners and losers, but most relevantly to you. Well, what kind of TV should you buy now that brightness is kind of pointless? Sure, there was this initial flurry of interest when HDR was announced back in 2014. Let's see, Mad Max Fury Road, right, in 2015, hitting, sometimes exceeding 3,000 nits in some of their most spectacular scenes. Then in 2017, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, thank you, James Gunn. A spectacular HDR feast for those who love the Marvel series. And then in 2018, everyone's favorite demo, Alpha, hitting 4,000 nits here and there. Well, that was it. Since then, these blockbuster type movies, fewer and fewer or disappeared altogether. I mean, this year, 2015, a little over 10 years later, nothing in terms of bright impact, nothing. Like this summer, James Gunn's Superman, the same James Gunn that did that HDR feast with Guardians of the Galaxy 2, right? Superman, I think we'd be lucky to break 100 nits. Yeah, it's mostly SDR because, let's see, HDR would distract from Superman's struggle to fit in as an alien in humanity. Okay, I get it. HDR, not relevant in that kind of storytelling. Then how do you explain Jurassic World Rebirth barely breaking 300 nits here and there? Let's see, it would be the dinosaurs' struggle against man's hubris. HDR would distract from that storyline. Come on! I mean, at some point, let's call a spade, which is Hollywood frankly detests doing anything in HDR. It's like reluctantly putting an extra 100 nits just for you. But the reality is they don't care. Here we are, 10 years after the whole HDR craze began, nothing. No interest at all. To understand how we got here, let's rewind to CES 2014 when Dolby Vision announced the greatness of 10,000 nit Dolby Vision, right? So this is when HDR became a thing. How they said, well, HDR is amazing. You go from super dark, like pitch black, all the way up to bright scenes. And Dolby Vision said, not just bright, 10,000 nits, because Dolby Vision is capable of giving you that metadata. And why is 10,000 nits so important? Well, when you have a specular highlight that's 10,000 nits, like a fireworks explosion, you can feel the heat. The color transforms and changes, and it's unique to 10,000 nits, and we need to get there, and TVs will get there, and suddenly content will be transformed. Every time you have fireworks or the sun in the distance, sunset, sunrise, explosions, right? Star Wars, when you reboot Star Wars, you have that exploding Death Star. You can feel the heat and the colors change because only with brightness do these things happen. Oh, I bought into it. As well as, you know who? The TV makers. They loved it. Yes, they had a new goalpost. Hardware became upgraded and better and transformed. We had primary RGB, we had MLA, we had QD OLED, we had mini LED. Everyone was trying to make their technology better and better so that they can hit 10,000 nits. And this year, RGB mini LED, thank you Hisense, announced they did it. 8,000 nits, and LG Display announced they did it. Primary RGB capable of 4,000 nits. That's this year. Next year we'll get closer. We'll be at 10,000 nits in no time. So 10,000 nits, hardware, TVs, will be there very shortly. Oh, and I forgot, Sony introduced the amazing BVM 3110, 2 years ago? Capable of 4,000 nits peak specular highlights. So when I say bright, 4,000, 10,000 nit, we're not talking about full screen 4,000 nit. That's crazy, right? The TV will blow up. No. We're talking little specular highlights, an explosion here, a flash there. When that's 4,000 nits, you feel it. Mad Max Fury Road, right? There were some samples where little 1% windows were 4,000 nits, and that made all the difference. Okay, that's what we're talking about. And this BVM3110, capable of natively showing that 4,000 nit 5% window. Amazing. Okay, so that was released 2 years ago. F1 the movie adopted it. They took that grading monitor, right, the reference monitor, the first movie to publicly say, hey, we're going to use this. And well, am I excited? Yes. I saw the movie in the theaters twice. It was so good. I couldn't wait for the home release. I got it. Kaleidoscape. I looked at it. 200 nits. Wait, you could have done that with your old BVM, the 310, that was made back in 2018. That was capable of 1,000 nits. Why'd you go out and get the 4,000 nit 3110 just to do 200 nits? And so I'm like, huh? Okay, but that's F1. So you got F1 disappointment. Jurassic Park Rebirth, we talked about that. No more than 300 nits here and there. And then you had Superman, with his excuse of the human condition and Clark Kent, struggling as an alien in a human world. We don't want HDR to detract from that, but 100 nits at best. I don't get it. Clearly, there is a disdain or maybe a disconnect between what creators and their tool sets they're using and this HDR tool where your TVs are capable of easily more than 2,000 nits. So I'm being greedy. I don't mean that Hollywood should be making 4,000 nit specular highlight movies. How about anything brighter than 200 nits and 300 nits? How about 700 nits, 800 nits? Not even in the books. So this goes to the conclusion. The sad conclusion is, let's call it what it is. You're never going to get bright HDR that your TV is capable of. Basically, Hollywood's like, whatever, yeah, great. You got bright TVs. Do your thing. We don't care. What next? Well, let's talk about the winners and losers before we get to my final conclusion about what we as consumers do when we consider buying TVs. Like, what are the real considerations besides brightness, right? Which clearly isn't important. So first, the TV winner and losers. Clearly, the winners that took full advantage of this, Dolby Vision. Everyone wants Dolby Vision. Why? I don't know, because brightness clearly isn't important to anyone. I get dynamic tone mapping, but that's only important if your TV can't really tone map adequately, right? The native HDR10 content. TVs are so good now, they do that really well, with or without Dolby Vision. Minor differences. Many of you see the differences, I get it. But the reality is Samsung still doesn't care, and for a good reason. They're like, okay, you may or may not see the difference. I don't think you will. Personally, I don't see a difference, but Dolby Vision still won. They are a thing. Many people demand it. Netflix has got it. Prime Video's got it. So they got their agenda, right? Dolby Vision, winner. Another winner, or two, TCL and Hisense. Boy, did they dominate the brightness wars. When the war was declared, we got to get brighter and brighter. Well, TCL, Hisense, all over it. Today, they've left the competition in the dust, right? Hisense and its 8,000 nit RGB mini-LED, TCL and its 3,000 nit QM8K for $999. I know it's a Labor Day special, but by Black Friday, it'll be back. Or the Hisense U75QG, 2,000 nits easy for like 700, 600 bucks. And the list goes on, right? They're definitely winners because they took full advantage of our interest in brightness, HDR impact. They won. They have beaten everyone to the brightness punch, and they are dominating, and they know exactly what to do to get to those peak brightnesses. And if there is content, for example, Jennifer Gallo, who creates content specifically to show off these TVs, they do it. But what about the losers among the TV brands? I hate to say it, Sony did not take advantage of any of this race for brightness, and smartly so. I guess they knew what Hollywood was doing, right? So they decided not to take part in the brightness wars. I mean, they were bright enough, definitely bright enough for the movies being produced today. The problem is, in the public's eye, Sony fell behind. So even though hindsight being 2020, we look back, oh, you know what, Sony, you made the right decision. You didn't have to get that bright because the content didn't justify it. Now, when you compared Sony against the other TV makers like Samsung and LG on test content, Jennifer Gala, Spears and Munsell, patterns, right, calibration meters, they lost badly. They could not get as bright. But when you put in real content, they look exactly the same because the content isn't that bright to begin with. So they may have lost in terms of meters and measurements, which ended up losing them reviews. They lost reviewer points because when you compare a bright TV to a Sony equivalent, that's not as bright, the reviewers would say, well, why are you spending so much money on a Sony when this TV, a few dollars less, gets you more brightness? So we're all thinking in terms of dollar to nits value. When the reality is Sony's saying, well, they kind of are saying it indirectly, it should be dollars to image quality value. Because if you look at image quality, which is the actual TV shows you watch, Netflix, Prime Video, YouTube, Sony is equivalent to the other TVs in brightness, whether it's a G5 against a Sony A80L. More often than not, it's going to look the same because the content doesn't need it to be that bright. And so you see what I'm saying? Many TVs were unfairly rated because we all assumed that we needed to take these TVs to their max and then grade them against the maximum points capable. But if the content doesn't justify the maximum brightness capability of the TV, why are we scoring them against an imaginary benchmark? And that takes me to another loser, related loser, reviewers. We lost. As reviewers, we are so excited about measuring these TVs against this perceived brightness of HDR impact. So I looked for content to generate HDR impact, right? Thank you again, Jennifer Gala, the HDR Super Channel, or movies like Mad Max Fury Road. I mean, we used that incessantly, the burning guitar, the fire guitar image, or Pan, another bright scene, or Alpha, a recent one I've been using that hit 4,000 nits. Literally, these are the same 3 movies that come back over and over for the last several years. Notice there's no new bright movies to be used because none exist other than YouTube content that's made by our creators that we know and love, and they create content specifically 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 10,000 nits. But the reality is real movies are not even close to that. They tap out at 300 or 400 nits, and that's in the occasional scene. Most of the movie, the specular highlights, are at 200 nits. I'd say F1 the movie, that's more representative. That tapped out at 200 nits. So let's take this year, right? G5, that's my HDR benchmark TV because it did so well in these bright scenes. But these bright scenes are all artificially created with the assumption that the movies will get there at some point. I don't think it's ever getting there. I've been creating this sense of HDR impact, this benchmark, the last several years now, and the movies have never come. None of them have really delivered on this HDR impact above 1,000 nits. And so now I'm thinking, wait, why am I doing this? As a reviewer, I'm deeply disappointed in the content not being there. And so now I'm just going to call it what it is. The content will never come. It feels like 200 to 300 nits. That's where we're going to live. And OLED TVs today, even the entry level, like the B series from LG, 300 nits is absolutely within its capability. You don't have to pay any more. Definitely, TV reviewers and the way they're ranking TVs based on brightness, we're all losers because at the end, we're ranking these TVs higher than they need to be because those additional points are wasted, and it's convincing you to spend that additional money on brightness that you'll never need. So with all of that in mind, how does it change my focus when comparing TVs? Well, I'm going to focus a lot less on the importance of HDR impact because these movies don't exist. HDR impact is a scale based on what you're watching. If the movies don't exist that deliver HDR impact, then the TVs don't serve, it doesn't carry that message of HDR impact. So let's say I have the G5, right? My HDR impact TV of the year. Well, if I'm watching movies and shows that don't have HDR impact, that G5 doesn't deliver. It doesn't matter that the TV has the best HDR impact. It doesn't make a less impactful source like Superman more impactful in terms of HDR. If Superman is an HDR disappointment, watching it at a G5 doesn't make it any better. As a matter of fact, it would look better on a cheaper LG B5 that's larger. That just because a TV is capable of high HDR impact, it makes badly done HDR more impactful. It doesn't. You can't make a source that has no HDR impact suddenly give it HDR impact just because it's on a better TV. Get a larger TV. That will deliver the goods. So as far as my reviews are concerned, right, first, the importance of HDR impact is much diminished in my eyes now because the source is so diminished in terms of HDR impact, but that makes size more important to HDR impact because it actually creates more impact, right? Having a TV capable of more brightness doesn't do anything for HDR impact. Having a TV that's bigger, the whole image being bigger, watching this very dim version of Superman on a 83-inch, on a 115-inch TV, on a 100-inch TV will be more impactful. The next one is skin tone accuracy. I think this goes more to the importance of your viewing experience out of the box, right? I know if you get a professional calibration, you will definitely be able to improve that, but most people don't. So for me, when I review TVs, it's in its most accurate mode out of the box. I compare it to my reference monitor, which is calibrated professionally, and then I see how close it gets to the reference monitor to render that natural skin tone. And that lastly takes us to things like new AI features that may be useful to you. Like I found one that was pretty useful, which Samsung is telling me to use. So for example, right, this is a Samsung feature that you can use. I'm testing it still, but you're watching, let's say, Ocean's 11. You like what Brad Pitt's wearing, and then you talk to the remote, hey, I love what Brad Pitt's wearing. Where can I buy that at Macy's or something like that? And apparently, it tries to find out and tells you, hey, right? So we'll have to test and see how good that is, which takes us to the last and most important point. You, the consumer, the buyer, well, what TV should I buy now that brightness is not really a consideration? Brightness is always a consideration to a certain degree, meaning, well, don't get a TV that's too dim. But if you get any of the TVs that I review, I can guarantee you this. I think the HDR impact will be there with the current content available. I will tell you one day when that content exceeds what these TVs are capable of, and I'll say, hey, if you like this kind of movie, get that TV. But let's just say, don't worry about brightness anymore. When I said it's over, the brightness wars is over, all the TV makers beginning 2026 will be delivering TVs that are more than bright enough for any HDR content coming out in the next few years. I'm very confident of that. I'm seeing the trends, I'm seeing what's happening in Hollywood, and frankly, I'm super disappointed. Yes, I've spoken to people behind the scenes who kind of work with some of the studios. Names will not be mentioned, but the reality is there is no interest concerning HDR impact. So, given all of that, focus on size. How big of a TV can you, or rather, how big of a TV do you want? And then from there, we look at the budget to get you the best TV for the money for that size. Because I think the TVs are so good now that even a large TV that's fairly inexpensive, so we'll say like a $2,000 100-inch TV, that image quality is excellent. Now, some people say, well, what about the processing, this and that? Well, you know, Sony has their 98-inch TV Bravia 5, or Samsung has their 98-inch QN90F. I mean, you have options where the size, you can get some really good processing, but at the end of the day, I would say focus on size, match it to your budget, and then quality of life things like the UI, like Tizen, WebOS, Google TV. But definitely, I'm going to stop mentioning the importance of HDR impact moving forward just because I think it throws in a red herring that doesn't help you with your decision making. Definitely didn't help me. I mean, I'm stuck with the G5 and I'm waiting for movies that take advantage of it, and it's not coming. Check out my rant on how dim the latest HDR blockbusters have been.